Welcome to the last lunch poems reading of the semester. Thank you all for coming. We hope you go away and have a wonderful holiday and come back for us in February. Wanted to remind you that the first reading of next semester is Adrienne Rich on the 6th of February, and that she will be reading in the auditorium at iHouse and not here in the Morrison Room. I'm really glad you're here. This starts to feel like a once-a-month family, and one of the pleasures of these events is to have extraordinary poets who have not been to Berkeley very much before, and I'm particularly excited that we have Mary Ruefle here today. The lunch poems doesn't happen without a lot of work by volunteers and clear organization and vision, and that vision and imagination and hard work is supplied by Zach Rogo, who really makes this happen. And he's going to introduce Mary Ruefle, and I'm introducing Zach, and this is a time for all of us to say thank you to him for his work in making this happen. And he's going to ask you to welcome Mary.
Thanks very much, Bob. I first encountered Mary Ruefle's work right here at this podium. 3 years ago, some of you might remember Tony Hoagland read here, and he closed his reading with a poem by Mary Ruefle. And that was quite a tribute. It was also quite a wonderful poem, so I looked up her work and was really struck by her daring and her wit as a writer. She's the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently Among the Musk Ox People. When we invited Mary to read at Lunch Poems, we asked her to send some items for a display case here in the library. And we kind of expected she would send books and maybe a broadside or a photo or a manuscript page, but instead we received in the mail a magical package that I think says a lot about her as a writer. The package was bound, but not with twine, but with a plastic correction tape from a typewriter strung with letters. On the wrapping paper of the package, she'd written in pen, "If I had to live my life again, I'd be a poet." All this, by the way, you can see in the corridor outside. If you go to the end of the corridor there, right before the circulation desk, the display case is up there. And not only that, the package contained a photograph, but Mary had used the photograph as a pad to write a poem on over the photograph. And she noted at the bottom the assignment she'd given herself of imagining for a day that she was a penny and where she had gone and who she'd met and how she felt. And also in this mysterious package was an illustrated Sunday school primer from probably 1890 or something. I imagine she found it in a garage sale or something, and called Snowstorm. And she took this book and used it to begin composing her own poem by whiting out all but a few words on each page so that the poem forms a kind of cubist text. It's both lyrical and wry. So please take a look at that too. But there was much more in this package, including a traffic ticket from her native Massachusetts. So I'm just warning you the kind of person you're going to hear today. And but it was very interesting to me seeing this package, that it reminded me that in her poems, the images and moments in her poems are not just a string of a narrative, but they're like found objects, as in a Joseph Cornell box, objects that seem to speak to one another and combine in surprising ways. In the case of her poems, the objects are found in her imagination. She reminds me of someone French, but I can't think who. Her work is full of wonderfully quirky humor that suddenly yanks away, revealing points of surprising seriousness. This is her very first reading ever in California, so please give a warm welcome to Mary Ruefle.
Monument. This is a prose piece. You should be able to hear that, maybe not. I'll be reading quite a few of these, I think. Monument. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Is the mic on? Can you hear me? No. How's that? Is that worse? Better?
No, that's
How's this? Can you hear that? Is that okay? Monument. A small war had ended. Like all wars, it was terrible. Things which had stood in existence were now vanished. I had come back because I had survived, and survivors come back. There is nothing else left for them to do. I had been on long travels connected to the war, and I had been to the centerpiece of the war, that acre of conflagration. And now I was sitting on a park bench, watching ducks land and take off from a pond. They too had survived, though I had no way of knowing if they were the same ducks from before the war, or if they were the offspring of ducks who had died in the war. It was a warm day in the capital, and people were walking without coats, dazed by the warmth, which was not the heat of war which had engulfed them, but the warmth of expansion, in which would grow the idea of a memorial to the war which had ended, and of which I was a veteran architect. I knew I would be called upon for my ideas in regards to this memorial, and I had entered the park aimlessly, trying to escape my ideas, as I had been to the centerpiece, that acre of conflagration, and from there the only skill that returned was escapement. Any others died with those who possessed them. I was dining with friends that evening, for the restaurants and theaters and shops had reopened, and the capital was like a great tablecloth being shaken in midair so that life could be smoothed and reset and go on, and I had in my mind a longing to eat and to afterwards order my favorite dessert, Cherry's Jubilee, which would be made to flame and set in the center of the table. And I had in my mind the idea of submitting to the committee a drawing of an enormous plate of cherries perpetually burning to be set in the center of the park as a memorial to the war, that acre of conflagration. And perhaps also in my mind was the hope that such a ridiculous idea would of course be ignored, and as a result I would be left in peace, the one thing I desired even beyond cherries. And I could see the committee, after abandoning my idea, remaining in their seats, fighting over the designs of others, far into the after hours of the workday, their struggles never seeming to end. And then I wanted to submit an idea of themselves as a memorial to the war. The conference table on an island in the middle of the pond, though at least some of them would have to be willing to be cast in agony. And then I saw on the ground an unnamed insect in its solitary existence, making its laborious way through tough blades of grass that threatened its root. And using a stick that lay nearby, I drew a circle around the animal, if you can call him that. And at once, what had been but a moment of middling drama became a theater of conflict. For as the insect continued to fumble lopsided in circles, it seemed to me that his efforts had increased, not only by my interest in them, but by the addition of a parameter which he now seemed intent on escaping. I looked up then, and what happened next I cannot describe without a considerable loss of words. I saw a drinking fountain. It had not suddenly appeared. It must have always been there. It must have been there as I walked past it and sat down on the bench. It must have been there yesterday and during the war and in the afternoons before the war. It was a plain gunmetal drinking fountain of the old sort, a basin on a pedestal, and it stood there, an ordinary object that had become an unspeakable gift, a wonder of civilization. And I had an overwhelming desire to see if it worked. I stood up then and approached it timidly, as I would a woman. I bent low and put my hand on its handle, and my mouth hovered over its spigot. I wanted to kiss it. I was going to kiss it. And I remembered with a horrible shock that in rising from the bench I had stepped on and killed the insect. I could hear again its death under my left foot, though this did not deter me from finishing my kiss. And as the water came forth with a low bubbling at first and finally an arc that reached my mouth, I began to devise a secret route out of the park that would keep me occupied for some time, when I looked up, holding the miraculous water in my mouth, and saw the ducks in mid-flight, their wings shedding water drops that returned to the pond, and remembered in amazement that I could swallow, and I did. Then a bit of arcane knowledge returned to me from an idle moment of reading spent years ago, before the war, that a speculum is not only an instrument regarded by most with horror, as well as an ancient mirror and a medieval compendium of all knowledge, but a patch of color on the lower wing segments of most ducks and some other birds. Thus I was able, in serenest peace, to make my way back to my garret and design the memorial, which was not elected and never built, but remained for me an end to the war that had ended. The day the earth stood still. I remember the day the official letter came announcing that on such and such a day, and on such and such a day, I was ready. I toweled off and sat by the window. The furniture was close by, and the smell of a ripe melon before its head has been opened and its fragrance aired. And a bathing suit left to dry with sand in its crotch after a day at the beach. A man walking down the beach with his shoes in his hand. Like him, there were things I both wanted and didn't want. But all the suffering in the world was gone. There was nothing anyone could do about it. People looked as if they had just been made, consecrated and scared, but that one, he was stupid and brave. He bent towards the earth, saying, "I don't want to disturb her, I just want to touch her." I remember his shoes looked startled just before they swayed. The refrigerator. There is the sound of the refrigerator being on. There is the sound of God beating inside my heart, which is a strange sound since he does not exist. There is the sound of a stone sent years ago, which was never answered. There is the sound of handwriting on a human forehead. There is the sound of 43 ducks flying through glass. There is the sound of a feather duster. There is the sound of dust heard over the telephone. There is the sound of a piano with a faint heart coming from below, a hell where people are happy. There is the sound of someone standing on the grave of someone they do not know and do not care about. There is the sound the same person makes standing on their own grave. I love the sound of the iron on the ironing board, turning on and off, waiting for someone to come. There is the sound of an electrical bill. There is the sound of a book lying closed, which is the sound of the storm painter in his dungeon. There is the sound of someone saying your name, which, if they did not have to, they would not want to. There is the sound of peaceful breathing in a far cranny where mouths all over the body break into smiles. There is the sound of a razor traveling with a hair. There is the profound sound of plates being stacked. Or is it the sound of dinkiness I hear? There is the sound of the refrigerator being off. There is the sound of everyone thinking the same thing at the same time, and the sound of one leafing through a magazine looking for a lifestyle. There is the sound of a cat on a hot tin roof, which is the imaginary sound of silk. The two greatest Egyptian gods made love in the womb. They were twins, so the sound of their birth was the sound of a pregnant baby. And this baby gave birth in turn, which is time, to the sound of the world in which you live. I'm so very honored to be here in Berkeley, City of Ideas. I was kind of nervous, you know, never been to the City of Ideas, and so I started thinking, God, I got to write something suitable. And I started thinking about ideas and where they come from and what we do with them and how they get passed on, and that's kind of, this poem is sort of an occasional poem. It's called Esthers Idea. We were waiting long and anxiously for the rain when the hot winds blew the unhappy lives of Ruskin and Hazlitt in through the open window, deeply affecting our own Aunt Esther. It was Esther's idea to put our pictures in albums. It was Esther's idea that we capture them. It was her idea that we sit in the evening and talk openly about love, and her idea to bring out the oil lamp, trimming its wick. It was her idea to stop going to church, and her idea that the children eat ice cream before going to bed. It was Esther's idea to take in a border, Esther's idea to hang curtains. It was Esther's idea to free insects. It was Esther's idea to keep the house dry and dust-free and count the days till it was safe to eat liver again. Afterwards, it was Esther's idea there is no such thing as bad weather. It was Esther's idea to love color above all else, to bound books in white vellum. And we think at the end, it was her idea to sit on the porch and stare at the road without speaking. It was our idea to bury her. And afterwards, we had the idea that most lilies are easy. We had an idea for lobster bait and an idea of Esther we took to our graves. As a man thinketh. 30 years of thoughts have been organized in plain brown folders with the main idea marked boldly on each cover. I rise from my job, which I have done well, and it has exhausted me. The way a gardener, after a whole season of labor, just stands there, strangely clad and in the dumps, eating his own onion, and it hurts. I look out the window and don't know what to think. I see red sunflowers. I see a baby crawling next to the eternal ocean. I see I am becoming the last trash can on earth, one of the many last trash cans on earth. My job is to tend the garbage carefully, then throw it out with a backhand. All except my shoes, which I would like to be buried in. Please praise me for that. Quick note about the think source. My dreams are not worth a halfpenny. A battery cut in two, 80 orange roses, an old boyfriend in a new car of the kind he would never drive. Fortunately for us, the universe is not that complicated. Eventually, words like torpor and muddle came into existence, came into being, and then torporous, muddled accounts of the universe took over the populace, many of whom died while it was snowing. There is always someone willing to tell you who they were, though it takes a little time to find the professional, but much less than if you had to do the reading yourself. If you are planning on being born, you should know there was a primordial abundance of helium. If something remains in the same position for 9 consecutive days, it is safe to assume it has passed, and that oleanders really do grow along the Oxus, which is a river. After that, you are free to pursue the violent activity of happiness. But for the universe, after the first 3 minutes, nothing of interest occurred for 700,000 years. It just went on cooling and expanding as if it were asleep on a premium mattress until it felt cold enough to wake up and make stars. The rest is almost history. Volcanic holes, small French paintings, one-eyed bats, a handwritten note wedged between the doors of a church. And oh, one more thing. When asked if you say, "I do not dance," the next day an infant is born without feet. And why I am not a good kisser. Because I open my mouth too wide, trying to take in the curtains behind us and everything outside the window except the little black dog who does not like me, so that at the last moment I shut my mouth. Because Cipriano de Rore was not thinking when he wrote his sacred and secular motets, or there would be only one kind, and this affects my lips in terrible ways. Because at the last minute I see a lemon sitting on a gravestone, and that is a thing that would appear impossible, and the kiss is already concluded in its entirety. Because I learned everything about the beautiful in a guide to the weather by Boren van Loon, so the nature of lenticular clouds and anticyclones and several other things dovetail in my mind, and at once it strikes me what quality goes to form a good kisser, especially at this moment, and which you possess so enormously. I mean, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without me, I am dreadfully afraid he will slip away while my kiss is trying to think what to do. Because I think you will try and read what is written on my tongue, and this causes me to interrupt with questions. A red frock, red stockings, and the rooster dead? Dead of what? Because of that other woman inside me who knows how the red skirt and red stockings came into my mouth, but persists with the annoying questions leading to her genuine ignorance. Because just when our teeth are ready to hide, I become a quisling and forget the election results and industrial secrets leading to the manufacture of woolen ice cream cones, changing the futures of ice worms everywhere. Can it be that even the greatest kisser ever arrived at his goal without putting aside numerous objections? Because every kiss is like throwing a pair of doll eyes into the air and trying to follow them with your own. However it may be, oh, for a life of kisses instead of painting volcanoes. Even if my kiss is like a paintbrush made from hairs. Even if my kiss is squaw root, which is a scaly herb of the broomrape family, parasitic on oaks. Even if a sailor went to sea in me to see what he could see in me, and all that he could see in me was the bottom of the deep dark sea in me. Even though I know nothing can be gained by running screaming into the night like a mouth, into the mouth like a velvet movie theater with planets painted on its ceilings, where you will find me, your podmate, in some kind of beautiful trouble over moccasin stitch number 3, which is required for my release. Something of a tractate. It was gone now, the boring summer, and those who survived it were stuffed with famous haiku. They were asked to reconsider everything they thought they knew about slipcovers, to eat bold and dangerous amounts of macaroni. They were taught it is better to say he died than to say he is dead, and then the long red winter began. Occasionally, an advertisement would shock the human out of them. Toads would sit on stones until lichen formed on their bellies. The air seemed to be at least partially composed of naphthalene, and so preserved, something of a tractate, when the last red leaf fluttered helplessly into the water, but seemed too to be joyfully dissolving in tears, as if to say, I too am a Swabian, born of carbon from the black pine forests, where the essence of all conceivable beauty is to put a stout heart to a steep hill. O Canada, is it raining where you are too? And the dirt roads are wet, and the air smells of mushrooms, and all the mailboxes are empty. If it is not raining where you are, it will be. Can you stop a wandering fool with no earthly goods from preceding you or following after? A girl went to work. The same girl came back. They passed each other along the dreary road. They sat next to each other on the bus. If they spoke, it was about the weather. Or one girl said, the friend of a friend of a friend has died in Canada. and the other said, "I'm sorry. I hope you are able to live your life over again." Short, exact sequence. All day long, encryptions of sand filled the pith helmet of my head. The afternoon crested and slumped, always advancing. The sun was everywhere. I slept and was antsy. I awoke and the silence had been refilled. I ate and the master of energy arrived. The short, exact sequence of my breath grew longer. I took a strip of dust that was dying on the wall from off the wall and made the dancing puppet of a ghost who did not disintegrate for 826 days, during which I repeated the ritual described above until I could perform it with my eyes closed and in front of other people. "13. I was 13, my whole leg in a cast. It was like lugging a piece of pottery around. And every human face I knew took a pen and wrote on me. I used to lie in bed at night and read it. And when I healed, they broke it. I walked away without a shard. Paula, Carl, whoever you are, I will not be there to drink the water beside your bed. I read 3,000 books, and then I died." Concerning essential existence. The horse mounted the mare slowly and precisely, and then stopped. He was profoundly disturbed by a piece of straw. He was profoundly distracted by the sad toy upside down in the tree. He was profoundly disengaged by half a cloud in the corner of his wet eye. And then he continued, "Nothing is forgot by lovers except who they are." My happiness. I lay my happiness in a field. My happiness lay in the field and looked up at the sky. My happiness extended the same courtesy to the clouds. My happiness in the field was visible for miles around. My happiness was visible to the hawk. My happiness was fond of the beetle beside it. A porcupine lumbered by. My happiness followed it. Perhaps because it was being followed, the porcupine stole my happiness. My happiness lumbered along after itself, happily. We came to a road. The porcupine went into a culvert and didn't come out, and that was the end of my happiness. Grief. First, it will comfort you to know there are crows and calipers for measuring the amount of sunshine that can escape from under the shadows of thought. Far out at sea, ships go down in a crippled light, and bunches of black iris are sent to the remaining crew. You too shall have lived and died a jot, with the queer feeling you were vast and ageless, with a good education in sleep, prepared to die with one regret, that you could not devote more years in vain. And no one could do nothing but let it happen. Whatever was tied to the mast, the waves have come. Here they are. After anxiety turns into pain, and pain turns into rain, and the rain into a doorbell on the face, the forehead splits open. Crows come for that speck of gold you were saving for your eyelids at the point of death, and turn away, wildly happy. Hazeline. After Father died, he said that dying had taken a longer time than he had previously imagined possible. He was not dead at that time, but we did not know it. His eyes had long ceased being the source of anything. He was stiff as a board, and he had no pulse. Mother and I were very interested in everything he had to say, the way the living are with experts. He said it was extremely painful, even now, but not in any way that he could explain or describe. Speaking was painful, he said, more painful than anything else, because being dead, he couldn't describe it. It didn't amount to very much. There was no way we could understand, and by the time we ourselves died, he would be long gone. He said there was a woman down the hall who was also dead, though no one knew it yet, and he could talk to her, but she wasn't listening. Mother bristled when he said this, and I put my hand on her arm. He was telling about how people, when they are dead, know each other by little signs that are not of this world. When Dr. Fillmore came in and said Dad would be fine, though he didn't use those words exactly, he used, "The old possum is going to be fine." That was Father. It didn't take anyone long to get to know him, a lot less time than it took to die, according to Dad, who died 6 weeks later without speaking a single word in the meantime. A picture of Christ. Christ had a cripple under each arm, the way people use crutches. He had a hard, glossy, thick tongue like the leaf of a camellia, and it was hanging out. He had his picture taken this way. He looked beat and strangely triumphant. After all, the sun was shining again. But the more you looked at the picture, the more you understood exactly what those words meant. The sun was a siren. The shining was its singing, and its song was again. Again and again you looked at it, and it always looked as if it had just been taken, as if the cripples were being paid a day's wages for 5 minutes' work, and the camellias had just torn off their leaves and given them away. And you got the feeling you too were donating your time just looking at it when you could be doing other things, though none of those other things you ever understood exactly. Kiss of the Sun. If, as they say, poetry is a sign of something among people, then let this be prearranged now between us while we are still peoples. That at the end of time, which is also the end of poetry and wheat and evil and insects and love, when the entire human race gathers in the flesh, reconstituted down to the infant's tiniest fold and littlest nail, I will be standing at the edge of that fathomless crowd with an orange for you, reconstituted down to its innermost seed protected by white thread, in case you are thirsty, which does not at this time seem like such a wild guess. And though there will be no poetry between us then, at the end of time, the geese all gone with the seas, I hope you will take it and remember on earth I did not know how to touch it, it was all so raw. And if by chance there is no edge to the crowd or anything else so that I am of it, I will take the orange and toss it as high as I can. English. All day the trees tossed, their thoughts were huge. All day they lavished their leafy tops against the sky and went on like this, insane without a reason, making the trees sound, telling about something that happened to them on a windy day. It was like coming across a man speaking secretly to his face, And when he was done, still he went on mouthing, as if a long, painful experience of time. But you must think him mad, munificent and hatless, a piece of tumbleweed in a poem growing as it blows. No, I tell you, it wasn't like this at all. By nightfall, the moths had eaten the letters of his name and left them in a sink like pieces of hair. And the trees were bare, roaring and bending and bare. Lichen. I apologize for not having much to say about these poems. They're all based on things that happened to me. Lichen. I wanted to go into the forest and collect lichen. I wanted to use the lichen in an art project because it had a crumbly, scaly texture and various shades of the same color appeared in the smallest patches. I was pretty sure lichen was rootless, but whether its living would be interrupted or unsettled in some way, I was unsure. I didn't want to pick lichen if picking it in any way resembled kidnapping. I seem to recall lichen was very old, among the oldest living things on earth, and that deserved considerable respect. But at the same time, there had to be young lichen. If lichen was living, it had to reproduce fairly regularly, and so some of the lichen had to be young. I did not know how to tell young lichen from old lichen. I did not know if young lichen and old lichen lived together. I did not know which of them, the old or the young, was better suited to kidnapping. I thought it true in general that the older the living thing, the closer it was to the end of its life cycle, and the less harm there was in kidnapping it. But also true in general that the younger a thing, the less its grip was on its own life, in this case the rock or bark, and the more willing it would be to be lifted out of its environment. I mean, the easier it would be to take it. If the old lichen clung most tenaciously to its rock or bark, it would be more difficult to perform the right sort of kidnapping, and if the young lichen could be fairly coaxed off its rock or bark, the easier it would be to perform the wrong sort of kidnapping. I sat and had these thoughts before I put on my coat to go into the forest and collect my lichen. My lichen. It seemed already to be in my possession. To eliminate as much confusion as possible, I decided I would collect only dead lichen. I knew that lichen was not of my species and certainly did not bury their dead. Therefore, the dead lichen must be everywhere in the forest, among the living, among the very old lichen, and among the young lichen, and I would find them. But how? How could I recognize the dead lichen among the living lichen? Surely the dead lichen did not perceptibly move, but nor did the living lichen perceptibly move. I had to admit I could not tell the difference between the living and the dead. Such an incapacity shocked me. If that were my criteria, it would be easier to collect bears, though, of course, in other ways, more difficult. I want to read a little poem on request here. This is called Merengue, which is a dance. Merengue is a dance, sort of like salsa. But merengue, of course, in our language is meringue, whipped froth egg whites. Merengue. I'm sorry to say it, but fucking is nothing. To the gods, we look like dogs. Still, they watch. Did you lose your wallet? Did you rip up the photo? Did you pick up the baby and kiss its forehead? Did you drive into a deer? Did you hack at the grass as if it could kill you? Did you ask your mother for milk? Did you light the candles? Did you count the buttons on your shirt? Were you off by one? Did you start again? Did you learn how to cut a pineapple, open a coconut? Did you carry a body once it had died? For how long and how far? Did you do the merengue? Did you wave at the train? Did you finish the puzzle or save it for morning? Did you say something? Would you repeat it? Did you throw the bottle against the wall? Did it break? Did you clean it up? Did you tear down the web? What did you do with the bug the spider was saving? Did you dive without clothes into cold water? Have you been born? What book will you be reading when you die? If it's a good one, you won't finish it. If it's a bad one, what a shame. I'll finish up here. Household. If you were very, very small, smaller than a leprechaun, smaller than a gnome or a fairy, and you lived in a vagina, every time a penis came in, there would be a natural disaster. Your dishes would fall out of the cupboards and break, and the furniture slide all the way to the other side of the room. It would take a long time to clean up afterwards. My last one, Pontiac. Someone in Pontiac, Michigan thinks I am pretty. I say, you should have seen me when I was 6 months old. My flesh, the flesh of a partridge. My legs spread by a steel bar. My perfect feet in orthopedic shoes bolted to the bar. I tell him the whole 20th century was basically a mistake. I tell this not to him, but to my bathrobe, who is linted and old and ignores me. She's been on dope for years. She's never been outside. She looks at me through the wrong end of a telescope and goes on chewing her sleeves. Finally, I start to get dressed, and when she's lying on the bed, she says, "Your capacity for suffering is infinite. How much fun we could have had if it was not." I pick her up, and we pass the afternoon in communal affection, without which the most benign of God's creatures would inconsolably wither. Thank you. Merci.